it's Alicia here with My Work Basket. Today I'm going to be answering a question I have long wondered about the Lutterloh system. And I mentioned in a previous video that I finally got one. I've wanted one for 20 years. And my goal had always been to get a 1970s, pretty much any set of years from the 70s Lutterloh system. And for various reasons, I never got one. And so finally I was like, just crack down and buy the new one. And then one day you'll find the old one. And so in buying the new one, I joined a Lutterloh group on Facebook, and another member from that group had an extra of a 70s set and sold it to me at a price that I could afford. I am so thankful for it. One of the main reasons I have not had one all these years is because they tend to get very expensive. So one of the questions I had in all of these years of wanting a Lutterloh system and, you know, wanting a vintage set, but also like wanting a new set was like, is it worth it? Should you buy an older set? And so first of all, I want to show you how little some design things have changed over the years. I mean, there's obvious differences, but this is my vintage Lutterloh set, okay? There's the front, there's the back. Now let me show you the brand new 2021 Lutterloh set. There's the front, there's the back. So I find it really fascinating personally how very similar over all these years the set packaging has remained. Also, when you open up the set, I repackaged my original. This is the new one with a very white folder. This is the supply kit. My tape measure's off a bit, but you can see there's the blue ruler, 2 pins, some tape. And then when you open the vintage one, 1970s edition, you get this. A more cream colored binder. And the toolkit. So they are just so very similar over all of those years of existence. And I just found that really interesting, because one of the things is if you want one and you're trying to save money and you're shopping on eBay, you have to look really close to even tell what year the system you're looking at is from. If the seller doesn't list it, and a lot of times it's like, oh, I found this in my grandma's stuff, you know. A lot of times just looking at pictures, you can't necessarily tell what year you're getting unless you really look at some of those fine details. One thing I did find interesting is the older set includes 3 pins. The new set only includes 2 pins. And one thing to be aware of if you are buying a vintage set is that my set, my tape is stuck all of a sudden. My set actually had a very interesting thing with the tape measure, where it had essentially melted into the styrofoam over the year. I don't know if it's over the years of its existence or essentially shipping to me and it's been hot recently. And actually I didn't even look at the address of where it came from, so it might have gone through some pretty hot states. And you can see in the thing where the tape measure goes, hopefully it shows on camera, like it literally had melted into the foam and you can see a tape measure shaped mark. And I was peeling off pieces of styrofoam out of it. So besides the differences or lack thereof in the overall system, whether or not you should buy a vintage Lutterloh, and of course this opinion would like vary dramatically, I'm sure, besides among anyone who has the system. Some people love to just collect them and have the different years. If you are looking at it as a way to save money, that like you can get an older version cheaper, that may not be the case. One of the main reasons I didn't have one for so long is because the vintage ones tend to get very expensive. If you happen upon one at like a yard sale, or I've seen some after the fact and they had already sold, I've seen some a little bit more affordable on like Mercari and some of those like used websites, you know, Facebook Marketplace. If you find a good deal, it may be cheaper, but if you're going to like eBay, oftentimes the vintage systems are going to be as expensive or sometimes even more expensive than the modern system. And so what it really boils down to, and whether you should or should not potentially buy a vintage Lutterloh or an older version of Lutterloh in 90s and 80s, you know, like vintage means different things to different people. What it should really depend on is like, if you're not doing it for budgetary reasons, you need to consider, are you collecting them? or do you actually intend to use it? And the reason I always wanted a 70s set was because the 70s is the era that I personally, despite having not even been born yet, I identify with that era the most. Like, the clothes are the most like I like to wear. The length of pants, the length of skirts, the length of sleeves, the cut of tops. Like, everything about 70s clothes appeals so much more to me and what I prefer to wear. And so the reason I always wanted a 70s set was to, in fact, make the system, make the patterns, and use them and wear them. And in reality, I suspected there would be more patterns in the vintage set that I wanted to make than there are in the new set. And it's not untrue for me personally. So if you are buying a vintage set, then I would base it either on, if you're collecting it to collect it and have it, you know, go for it if it fits in your budget, whatever. If you want to make the Lutterloh patterns out of that book, I would not suggest buying from an era that you don't identify with the clothing. Like, I personally cannot picture getting a set from, say, the 90s and, like, really making anything at all hardly from that set. I would never, short of paying like $5 at a yard sale, I personally would never spend the money on a set from like the 90s. I'd only pay possibly for the 80s if I could really flip through it. I'm not a huge 80s clothing fan. They did have that kind of, like, they had like the kind of wild stuff, but they had kind of the Victorian Renaissance also. I probably would not go big on getting an 80s set, but the 70s set for me was like a big deal because I identify with that and I knew I'd want to make that set. So let me show you, and this is kind of funny. This is my brand new Lutterloh, the 2021 edition, and these are the post-its that I put in as to, like, I really like this, I could picture making this, I could picture making this modified. Okay, so that's how many post-its it got. It got a lot of post-its. And I showed in my other video that I was really happy with how many patterns I wanted to make. Now, let me show you my 1970s Lutterloh set, because I discovered something very interesting. So, it looks, on first glance, almost the same. But the interesting thing is, when I was going through the 70s set, I realized I was about 12 pages in, and about 10 post-its in already. And so I was like, I cannot mark every item that I like. I'm going to be going through like an entire pack of page markers and be halfway through the book. I mean, like, I was just marking every page. I just loved all of them. So I actually ended up marking in this book only the ones I really want to make, like really soon, the stuff that I really loved. And so I had a few here that are like the ultra want to make these soon. Very, very favorites in the whole book. And these were the, like, I want to make these soon. Now compare that to the I want to make these soon in the new system. And including the fact that some of these include modifying it. None of the ones in the 70s set would I really modify. Like, I want to make them as shown. So to me, the 70s set actually has more clothes in it that I want to make than the new set does. And so if you're thinking about buying an older set, that's what you really need to base it on. How likely are you to want to make the clothes from that era? Now, one thing I will say too, the old sets versus the new sets, to me, have a dramatically different image styling. And I'll show you what I mean. So flipping through, this is the 2021 Lutterloh. I feel like you can flip through patterns, and there's very few poses. I feel like I'm reminded of like a kid's book where you kind of trace the bodies and fill them in. Like, I just don't feel like they're all very different. I feel like they're the same size, they're the same body shape. But the vintage set, the graphics varied so much more. Even in like drawing styles, face styles, I was really just flipping through the older set. To me was more entertaining at just how different and varied the general fashions and stylings were, and the drawing styles, like I said, were just so different to me. Also, one big difference with the vintage set versus the new one, I don't think the new one had really any accessories. But the vintage one had a couple of belts. It had one really neat little like coin purse that was on a belt. It had collars. There was multiple separate collars in the vintage set. And so the vintage set had a variety of like accessories also. So there's like one page where I think that one's actually collars. That one might be the whole shirts. So there's some where it's like, here's the dress, and then here's 4 collars you can add to the dress. And so like, that's the type of thing. But I was really intrigued with how different the graphic stylings were. The quantity of poses, the type of style of the general drawing and everything to me was just so different in the vintage set. So for collector purposes, to look through the old ones, I mean, there's 280 patterns. What are the chances you want to make none of them? You know? So at that point, it really depends on your budget. But if you're looking at it as a way of like, well, I really want one, I don't know if I can get the newest one. If you're going to get an older set, my absolute advice is to base it on what you think you'd wear if your intention is to actually use the set. If your intention is just to have it, to collect it because you think they're fun and you want to have as many as you can. There's another interesting one. That's like the 70s one with the people drawn together. And I just feel like the graphics were such a better styling in the 70s one. So if your intention is to collect them because you want to collect them, go for it as long as it fits in your budget. But if your intention is to make the items and you want to do it, I would personally suggest buying something that's from an era that you enjoy. The system itself, pretty much identical. The only difference is in some of the eras of books, the total sizing you can do is different. So the modern system goes up to, I think, 140 centimeter measurements. The vintage systems, some of them only go up to 130, and I think some of them even only go as high as 120. So if you're a bigger than, you know, I am, or if you're kind of if you're in that higher size range, the old systems may not fit you. Like, they may not have the measurements possibly to go high enough. I don't know if getting a new ruler with the newer, like, I don't know if that simple increase would make it fit or if it's kind of bigger than that. So if you're in that higher size range, you may not be able to make an older kit work, especially without some like varieties of like adding tools or making adjustments. I would think just getting a newer, bigger ruler would be enough, but I could be totally wrong. So that is my kind of thought process on if you wanted a new versus a vintage Lutterloh. I hope this helped you if you've had that same question I've always had, because I've spent so many years questioning, like, should I just go for it? Should I get the old one? Should I just go for it? Should I get the old one? And now that I have both, I'm super excited. I can't even believe I got both things that I've always wanted. It's like Christmas. It's so exciting. But I just wanted to really take the time, since I have both, to answer that, because that's one question I always had and could never find an answer to. So that's my opinion on that. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. I hope you found it helpful, and I appreciate you watching, and I hope you have a great day. Bye!